Okay, so this video is going to cover how to take a model from Rhino and then render it in D5 render. So I have my Rhino model saved. You don't have to export it as any particular file. Some things I would do before you export it though, make sure different materials are on different layers and each layer has a render material assigned to it. Even if it's a different color, in Rhino, it doesn't have to be an advanced material. You could just do this and change the color here under the material. And the reason we do that is so that when it opens in the render software, it'll recognize everything that's on this layer as one material, and you'll be able to change that material in the render software. Okay, so I've saved this. I'm going to open up D5. By default, it's really the same keyboard commands as a lot of other real-time render engines. D5 uses your graphics card to render in real time. So unlike more traditional render software like V-Ray, you're not just seeing a shaded model, you're seeing a rendered model. You're seeing it 3D in kind of its materials. So I'm going to go to File, Open, find that model. And again, these are all the different file types that it can recognize. So 3DM is the Rhino extension. I'm just going to hit Open. It also accepts SketchUp and other file types. I'm going to say Don't Save. It's going to open it. And so it'll bring in the model, and what it's doing is it's assigning materials based on the materials that I already had in the project. So I was rendering it in V-Ray and Rhino. So those materials that I had created in Rhino are doing their best to transfer over. So that's why, this has more of a shiny material. This is like a aluminum, and this is this standing seam metal. This wall should be white stucco, so we can modify that. The different panels in D5, the top here, you'll see assets. Assets are really in a couple different categories. There's model assets, which are 3D objects like cars, people, furniture, things like that. The majority of these assets only get unlocked with the Pro version of D5, but you still have access to a handful of them with the free version. It's going to take a second to load some of these, but just going back to all. So again, there's three categories. There's model, which are 3D objects, material. So here you're seeing these start to load. These are some of the 3D people that we have. You can download these. So this is free, but then if you keep scrolling, if you look at some of these other ones, you'll run into the kind of paywall. You'll have to pay. So once the person is loaded, I can just drop them into the scene this way. So that's model assets. Material assets, these are materials that come preloaded, which again is a really nice feature of D5. You can make your own custom materials, or you could use any of these presets. Okay, so model assets, material assets, and then particle assets like fire and water, falling leaves, things that require animation. Those are also available. Again, as a basic render suggestion, I think the advice that I would give is don't overwhelm the view with entourage like particles and things like that. You know, it's about the architecture, and if you want your design to be the thing that's at the forefront, then I wouldn't go overboard with their assets, right? So any of these three categories. Okay. And again, that's all under assets here. You can also import geometry that you've modeled from other projects. So, you know, if I wanted to import another model, I could do that as well. So I think that probably just dropped it in at the same place. So let's say we have dropped this in. This is the model here. Oh, actually, this is it. So I can click and drop in other models. And when I want to I can right click it and delete it if I want to remove that particular model. Uh, can hit delete that way as well on the keyboard. So we've talked about the asset panel here. This is import. There's different layers, so we can create layers. Let's say we have different models that we're bringing in, or we want to put people on one layer. We can add layers and turn them on and off here. So if I go to objects, I will see the person that I've dropped in and any other assets that I have, which I can turn on and off. So let's say I don't want people in one rendering, I can click this eyeball icon. Let's say I want to hide the model I brought in, I can click the eyeball there. I can lock each of these so that they can't be moved or edited. You'll notice when I click on a given material, it's going to select everything that was on that layer, everything that was assigned to that material here. So I can go under Assets, Material, and I can assign a material to that. So if I scroll down to Metal, let's say I want a black matte metal, I can download that. And I can click and drag. Let's let it download. I can click and drag and it'll assign it to a material. So now I've just given this metal screen a dark metal material. So you can see a preview of it in real time. And that's really the beauty of these real-time render geometries, is that you're able to see the results in real time. You're not waiting to hit render before seeing that. Okay, so I can bring in, say, wall paint, just as an example here. Beige concrete. So let's say I like the texture of this, but I want to change the color of it. You can assign a material, and again, just drag and drop it onto the object that you'd like it to assign to, and it'll find all of that material on the layer that you had assigned. And let's see a preview of it here. So let's say I don't want this to be as beige. I can select it, and notice there's a tab here on the right. So this whole tab allows us to, this is the inspector, so this allows us to change the qualities or the properties of that material. So I can select it. I can change the base color map. If I want to change, I can actually set this to an image. I can also just change the RGB values. So let's say I wanted to change the tint. Let's say I wanted this to be a little more reddish, or make it darker, make this white. Okay, so you can you can edit the materials even after you've brought them in. All right, so it's not just doing it for that wall, it's doing it for this wall as well. There's other things we can modify. So if I select this, you can change the normal, which is basically this is a material property that allows us to modify kind of the height map. So you can actually have textures that stick up out of the surface. So between that and bump, there's a lot of kind of things that we can do as designers to affect the texture, the physical texture of the object. So if I go see materials, so let's say for example you have a standing seam metal roof, and change the scale of this too. You kind of see it happening here where the actual JPEG that I had saved or bitmap, that's actually showing up in the texture itself. So I can change how much of this I want, right? Like let's say I have corrugated metal, for example. I can change the normal value here. I should be able to scale this as well. So if I want to stretch this, I can add more corrugations or fewer in the material. Okay, so it's actually not this material that I want to assign to this one. So I can actually say duplicate. I'm going to duplicate this material that I've been editing and then assign it to this one, which I had already modeled the standing seam physically. So this is actually a physical model that's creating those seams. But if I wanted to do it just through the texture, I could do that here as well. Okay, so let's say I wanted a kind of a metal fold in the panels. I could create that effect through the material, or I could create that effect physically in Rhino. And D5 also has some like a converter app, so I could open up Rhino and hit sync, and it would synchronize my 3D model in Rhino with D5, so I don't have to hit file save and then update this model. I could just hit the sync, and it would synchronize the models accordingly. But let's say I wanted to assign a different material. This won't have corrugation, so I'm going to go to metal, and I want more of a aluminum. I think frosted silver might be a good solution for this. So I can download it, and then I select it and select again, and it'll assign it to that material. And going back to this, so there's some things that we can modify here. There's other ways we can create our own material, custom materials. So specular highlights we can change. Normal, again, if this is too much, we can bring that down. So there now is less of a bump on the material, right? So it's less bumpy here. And again, to change it, you just select the material, and you can increase the normal this way. But I'm going to set this to 0. So I've assigned a darker metal for our standing seam, a lighter metal for our roof. This is some kind of mistake. I think I've imported 2 separate models here. But let's So I've also put in a person, which you can select, you can move using this gimbal. You can rotate each object that you bring in. So let's look under assets. We go to model. Let's say we want to place some furniture outside. Click on the furniture tab and you'll see their list of furniture. And if you so all of this is free to download, but then once you keep scrolling, you'll notice the Pro icon here. So you'd have to have a paid account for any of that furniture. But again, for simple renders, and I think for the sake of the projects that you all are working on, you want to keep things simple. Don't overdo it with furniture and other assets in the project. So um, landscapes, road, office. So a lot of really interesting things to add. Let's say we wanted to add trees to the background. You could download autumn trees, zoom out and drop this in. And so when this renders, you'll have kind of a backdrop of trees to create, to give you a bit of a background here. So it's not just a continuous horizontal plane of a skyline. I can select this and I can hit duplicate and it'll duplicate it. So I can drop this one over here. I can rotate it. So when I get the scene that I like, let's say I'm at eye level, now I have some kind of backdrop for the rendering. So let's say I wanted to assign a kind of wood material for this fence. I could go to Assets, Material, go down to Wood, and find a material that works for a wood deck. So they have a number of options. Most of these are for interior wood floors, but we can customize any of these as well. We could add our own normal map to it, also known as a bump or displacement map. But I can go in and grab any of these. Let's see. So yeah, some of these are pro, which I don't have access to. Let's just take a look at this. So I can download Sweet Chestnut. Click on that and then apply it to the geometry. And so here the scale is completely off. So I'm going to select the material and I'm going to set the scroll all the way down to stretch, and I can change the scale of this up or down. I'm scaling these uniformly in the X and Y direction, but you can change that if you like. So again, this is more of an interior wood floor or a veneer wood. So I would probably change this, but this is how to change the scale of the material. And this could go a long way in, as far as the, if you're doing more of a realistic render, you want to make sure the scale of the materials is accurate. So here, this one, you can try this. It's called anti-corrosion wood, which would probably mean composite wood. I can drop this in. And again, the scale of this is completely off. So we're going to have to select this and stretch it. say 15, 50, getting better. But you can also rotate the material too. So let's say we want the planks to run the other way. I can hit 90 and it'll rotate them. So now this looks a little better. Scale I'll bring down to 40. So that's changing the scale of the material. There's other little things you can tweak. So let's say this 90-degree edge doesn't look realistic. Maybe we're working with concrete. Then you can set this to round corner, and it's going to create a little chamfered edge at every corner here with a radius that you can play with. So when it renders, it won't have these like perfectly sharp corners, which is often not desirable in a rendering because it just makes it look unrealistic. Nothing has a perfectly 90-degree corner. So I'll download this one. We'll make the wood fence out of this. Although it's not very realistic. We can change the scale. I'll set this to 30. So I go around and I assign materials. I add a minimal amount of furniture and things to make this fall into place. You can add vehicles if you want, but again, don't go overboard with the assets. I think it's really just enough to set the scene and make things presentable. Also, you can import 3D furniture that you download from the internet as well. Don't feel like you're limited to just what's here. I'll download some outdoor furniture to place on the deck. Drop another one in. Select it, rotate. And again, I'm just setting the scene. I'm not overwhelming the view here. You can use the keyboard command delete to remove geometry. Go back to character, casual. So you can explore the different categories, find something appropriate for your scene. Say I want this guy with a camera. Place him here and rotate. All right, so there's other ways that we can add assets. So let's say we have, well, first let's assign a grass material to this flat plane. So I'll go to material. We find under go to outdoor, underground. You'll see various ground types. We can use any of these grass options. I can say grassland. I'm just going to select that, select the material I want it to assign to, and again, select it. I'm going to set this to 40. So it's going to change the scale of this to something that is more realistic, maybe 60. And then again, you can change the other material properties of this. You can set set this to foliage. You can change the color map here, so if you want this to be more saturated, change that. Actually, it's changing the other material. Selecting that, you can assign a new image map to it. So if I go to image, I actually have a so there are images that I've downloaded over the years of, for example, under foliage, set this to large. So I have some grass textures that I've just downloaded from online. You can just Google like seamless grass texture, for example. Increase the normal of that. Set this to displacement. And then bring the saturation down. Sure, why that. So you can play with these settings to get the texture that you're looking for and the colors and everything. Set the specular to 0, so that's has to do with reflection. You can change the height. Again, stretch, all of those things can be modified as well. So there's other ground types. So you want gravel, download that. Takes a second to download. I can drop it in, and then again modifying the scale, set this to 40. All right, so once I've set the materials, the entourage, people, trees, all that I need, set the scene. And so what we want to do is choose a view that we're happy with. And again, I can toggle using the holding down right click. Oh, one other thing I wanted to show. So let's say we want to add plants and we want to add them in a path. So rather than having to individually add assets to the scene, I can actually just go to Assets, Model, and you can do this for any geometry, but I'm going to go to Nature. I'm going to plant some shrubs along the side of this. And some other, like, just in general render tips that I would give. Model the scene as it's going to be relevant for the particular view you're going to render. Don't go in and add foliage in places that won't show up in your actual render. So let's say I want to download this. I will click on that. And so instead of just dropping it onto the scene, what I want to do is apply it using a brush. So I can select brush. I can select multiple types of plants here. Let's say I wanted to scatter a bunch of these. So let's say, I'll start with just this one. I can just click and hold, and it's going to apply the plants in a kind of brush. So I can just click and drag, and it's going to add these and kind of randomly scatter them. And you can set the radius of that scatter here. So let's say I want a larger radius, right? That dome just got a lot bigger. Or bring this down for it to be smaller. I can set the density. Let's say I want to have really dense assortment of plants. Now they're much more compact. But again, the more I do this, the more I'm slowing down the render when I do hit final render. So just keep that in mind. I can change the scale. So I'm changing the size of the brush here. And this is the brush option. I can erase these. So I can just click and drag. I can change the size of this thing. I want to erase all of these. I can also assign plants in a linear path. So let's say I want a row of shrubs. I can just do this, maybe along the, and there's also a radius here too. So notice how it created that path, and there's actually a radius to this. So if I was adding cars to a scene or people, and then hit escape to complete it. And I can select that path, and I can increase the number of items along the path. I can say random direction so that they scatter a little bit. They don't look like they're all just duplicated. I can go to random spacing, random offset. So if I want them to be slightly scattered so they don't look as perfect, random offset. Change the size. And then I can add other models to it. So let's say I choose another plant to mix in here. So I don't want them all to be the same plant. I can add this one. And so now it's both of these. Decrease the number of items. So one of them's a lot larger, so you're seeing it. But so now it's going to randomly scatter among both of those plant types. And I can move this all at once using this gimbal. So I'm going to scale these down. Rotate this a little bit. All right, so, and again, there's shrubs, there's trees, a broadleaf tree. And again, this would be something more for the foreground because it'll render the leaves and show a lot more detail of this tree, but something like this is great for the background. So, because it's not going to take up as much memory when you're rendering this. So I can drop trees in. Okay. So once I'm happy with this scene, I'm going to choose a view that I like. Something like this. Let's drop some plants back here. Nature, shrubs. This one that I've already downloaded. Click and drop those in. select these, and to select multiple, you hold down Alt. So I can select multiple. I can change the size of all of these at once. A little big. Back to 1500. Okay, so now I have kind of a soft edge in the back when I render this. So once I've chosen the view, I'm going to hit Create New Scene. So it'll save that particular view, and I can go to another view, hit, I'm going to say Add Scene, so it adds that render as well. And it's actually going to save the sun settings as well. So let's say the point of this design is to have the perforations create an interesting shadow pattern. So I can play with the sun location here to achieve that effect. So as designers, it's important for us to have the agenda behind each of these renderings. Right? We want to make sure that everything is for a reason. Notice how I just clicked on scene and the sun moved back to where it was. So I have to change this, affect it, make sure that the lighting is what I want. And then I would right click and I would hit actually update scene. You don't have to right click for that. So set this to be what I want. And then just hit update scene and it'll notice the icon just updated. So it'll now save this particular setting for the sun. So I could then go to another scene with a different sun location and then click back on this and the sun is going to update. Okay, so it's not just the sun location that we can play with. Let's say I'm happy with just the sun in this one. Maybe I want to change this so that it's more of a long shadow. I can do a north offset too, so this will change which direction north is. I can affect the amount of clouds. So this is kind of the manual settings. Set the density of the clouds, the height of the clouds, the speed. So if you're doing an animation or render animation, you can change how fast the clouds are going to move. You can turn fog on. So if we want more of a fog in the background, this is good because it's a little more realistic. You're not always going to have, there will be some atmosphere for the kind of trees and landscape that's far in the distance. You can set the height for the fog, amount of fall off. So there's a lot you can play with here. You can add precipitation. So let's say I wanted a reflected floor. So I can add rain to this, which does a pretty decent job of adding reflections, the amount of rain. Well, you can go from rain to snow, which is kind of funny. And you can affect the amount of rain here. So oftentimes in renders, we'll do this just to give the building more of a dynamic effect. It gives you the reflection, so it can be a nice nice feature to add. So let's say we're like this view. I can update this scene. And let's say for scene 2, instead of just manually affecting the clouds and sun and all that, let's say we have an HDRI image. And an HDRI image is basically an image that we can use to import the lighting effects of that image and bring those into our scene so that it lights the scene based on an actual image, which can make it look a lot more realistic. So you can see I'm changing these to just show the different HDRIs that come preloaded. And you're noticing not only the sky is changing, but the lighting effects on the model are changing. So if I go to more of a sunset, you're seeing that sunset here. There's a little bit too much light in the sky right now. I think I can change the amount of light. I can bring that down or up, and it'll affect the lighting in the scene. I can turn on sun, and I think this will help us. You can change the color temperature, more of a warm or cool effect. We can also import HDRI images. So let's say I have one that I've used in other projects. So I can go to Materials, HDRI, and you can download these from a number of websites. So again, what it's going to do is it's going to take this image and use the lighting of that image to affect the scene. So I want to make this a little cooler. And affect the sunlight intensity here. And notice how the reflection in this window is also based on that HDRI. So it gives you a more realistic image. So a lot of professional renderers will use HDRI images because it just creates a more realistic effect on the scene. So once I've found the HDRI that I like, I can hit update. Let's choose another one. So I can select this, click on and load a different image. Again, it's going to apply this to the backdrop, so we may want to do something a little different. So once we've chosen a HDRI that we're happy with, we can rotate the HDRI to give us the scene and the lighting that we're interested in. And again, I can set the color temperature, rotate this a little more to get the lighting that we like. We don't want the lighting to be completely behind the camera because then it makes the image look really flat. So as long as it's, we see some shadow, right? We want to see some shadow in the render. We don't want it to be, the lighting to be exactly behind us. So I'm going to check sun disk radius. That affects, I think, how blurry the shadows are. And you can set the direction of the sun to be custom, and so we can actually have it not follow the HDRI. So when we do have it follow the HDRI, it's just going to choose the brightest spot in the image, and it'll assume that's the sun location. Otherwise, I can set it to custom. I can change the altitude and azimuth. So here we'll get maybe some of the perforation shadow that we want. Want it to be a higher sun or lower. You change the length of those shadows. And again, we can affect the fog, have more of a fog view here. And again, this is all changing the atmosphere, the mood of the image. This is more of a calm image. We can set volumetric light. If you're working with fog, I recommend that. This is more of a cloudy day. And again, I'm going to hit update. So make sure to hit update scene to save all of your settings. All right. And once we're happy with a particular view, so this is our rainy day, maybe we should have more clouds. Increase the cloud amount here and hit update. So once we're happy with that, one other thing we can change is the camera effect. So you can change the view range. So right now it's set to 90. If I want a wider angle, a more narrow lens, I can play with that here too. So choose the angle that gives you the effect that you're looking for. If you want a more dramatic view and you're in here, maybe you go with a wider angle, right? If you want this thing to look more exaggerated and the cantilevers to look more accentuated, then maybe that's something you would do. And again, once you've set that and you're happy with it, you can hit update. Now we have this. I can right click, delete it that way, or I can select this and I could do it. So I think if I hit add scene, yeah, so now I've just duplicated it by selecting it, hitting add scene, and I can then go in and modify this view range, put this to something a little more narrow here, change that view angle. So just a combination of holding down right click to orbit and then holding shift and right click to pan and setting the view that I like. And then I would hit update, always make sure to update scene. Okay, so now pretty quickly I have 3 rendered views of the model that I'm ready to render. So to do that, if I just want a still image, I'm going to go to image, and to render these, you can change the aspect ratio, so the size. If I want 16 by 9, this will give me a crop view of what it would look like. Maybe based on this, I want to zoom out a little bit or modify this. So I could zoom out, hit update scene so that I get the peak of my roof in here. And then the image size. So choose the image size. We'll say 2K for now. And you can either render just this image by hitting this, or if I want to do a batch render, I can hit add to render queue. So let's say we want to render all of these at once. I'm going to say add to render queue. Probably save the project. That's something we should have done from the beginning, but here we are. So I've added this to the queue. I can go to scene 1. If I'm happy with that, I can add that to the queue. I'm going to set this to 16:9, 2K, add it to the queue, and add this last one. Happy with that. Add it to the queue. And if I go to render queue over here, you'll see all of the images that I've added. And if I select these, so I can check all of them, and I simply hit render, it's going to save the project and then render each image. And it's saving them here under Documents, D5 Render, and then the file name. So once these are done, I'll be able to look there and find the image. Okay, so these are some of the images it produces. 2K is already pretty high quality, but you're seeing reflections, some rain here, reflective floor, some images. It'll also produce the material channels as well, so you can use this to Photoshop and select different materials. It's going to give you the ambient occlusion model as well. So see the different views that it creates. All right, so that's the tutorial on D5.